The 2024 MotoGP season has reached its finale. The weekend that this video goes up, Pecco Bagnaia and Jorge Martin are fighting for the World Championship. But they'll both probably be remembered fondly by history. Two of the best riders in this new era of high downforce, extreme body positioning, aerodynamically advanced motorcycles that we're entering every day. However, not all riders are lucky enough to be remembered throughout time. There are plenty of riders who were good, great, and even absolutely legendary in their day, who are just forgotten by fans today for one reason or another. Today, we're going to go back and take a look at a few of these riders, what they did in their careers, and why they absolutely deserve to be remembered as key pieces of Grand Prix motorcycle racing history. Let's dive into it. First on our list is Jack Findlay. How can a rider who had a whole movie made about him possibly be forgotten? That's the question I always ask myself when it comes to the Australian rider Jack Findlay. The star of the French documentary Continental Circus raced in the Grand Prix Motorcycle Racing World Championship from 1958 to 1978. What makes this long career even more impressive is the fact that Findlay was a privateer rider for the vast majority of his career, meaning that he paid his own dime for bikes, repairs, travel costs, everything. He was really doing this for just the love of the sport. Now, in sports, there's a concept called a journeyman, and a journeyman is usually a player or a competitor who bounces around between teams and never really finds a proper home. In MotoGP, it's hard to be a true journeyman, especially in the modern day with so few factories actually having bikes on the grid. But Jack Findlay is maybe the closest example of a journeyman that MotoGP has ever had. He represented 13 different manufacturers in 4 separate classes throughout his long career, riding for Norton, Mondial, Matchless, AJS, Yamaha, DMW, Bridgestone, Ermachi, Linto, Sealy, Suzuki, and Jada. Across 156 Grand Prix race starts, he found the most success towards the end of his career on Suzuki. He secured all 3 of his career race wins on the Japanese machine, including the coveted Senior TT win at the Isle of Man in 1973. His best finish in official classes came in 1968, where he finished behind Agostini for the Premier Class title. Now, famously, Agostini secured a perfect season that year, so Findlay really had no hope. But he was clearly the best of the rest. Findlay had a very impressive record this year, securing 5 second places and a third on his matchless machine. Now, you may have noticed some odd things about this section. An asterisk over the 4 classes that Findlay raced in, me specifying his best finish in official classes. Well, that's because Findlay's true greatest Grand Prix success came in the unofficial supporting class of the 70s, Formula 750. For those who don't know, Formula 750 was a supporting class that accompanied the Grand Prix circuit at some of their tracks throughout the season. The class was open to any bikes with their engine displacement sizes from 251cc all the way up to 750cc, deriving its name from the maximum engine size. Formula 750 was a very popular class, and having a potential larger engine size than the Premier class at 500cc's, for a time it seemed as though it had the potential to take over as the new Premier class. However, it wouldn't even officially become a world championship until 1977. It would run for some years as a supporting class called a European Championship despite having rounds in the US and other continents, and it wouldn't become an official world championship until 1977. Even then, the results were classified separately from the rest of the Grand Prix classes. Think Moto E, but if they didn't count it as a class when they made it a world championship and just made it its own thing. We find ourselves 2 years before that development, in 1975. In 1975, Jack Findlay would ride his Yamaha TZ750 to the Formula 750 European Championship title. And this was no slouch class. Riders such as Barry Sheene and Patrick Pons were partaking this year, albeit not really as full-time competitors. Findlay was the embodiment of privateer spirit in Grand Prix racing. He was a rider who just wanted to race, and would do anything it took to get there. In reality, his name wasn't even Jack, it was Cyril. He took the name Jack so he could pass off his dad's identification as his own and start his career a couple years early. For 20 years, Findlay would race at the highest level, competing against some of the most famous names the sport has ever seen, until a skull fracture in 1973 would slow him down, and coupled with the rising costs of being a privateer rider, eventually he would be forced to retire. I love Findlay's story. I love the idea of the privateer riders of the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Just true free spirit motorcycle riders following the Grand Prix circuit and racing with the best in the world. It really is a shame that Findlay isn't talked about more, but I can't say I don't get it. one Formula 750 title before it was even a world championship isn't really much in the eyes of modern fans. So why don't we get a little more modern with it? The most recent rider on our list today is Jeremy McWilliams. Now, some of you are probably thinking, hey, I'm pretty sure I've seen that guy race. And you probably have, because McWilliams raced his last race in 2014, very recently. McWilliams was born in 1964 in Belfast, Ireland, and he entered his last Grand Prix race in 2014, a full 50 years later. Other than being maybe the only rider in history to race at the age limit in MotoGP, McWilliams had a rather lackluster career. In 1994, he rode what was called a, quote, very stock Yamaha to limited success, but some good qualifying results on the bike prompted serious praise from Mick Doohan. Speaking of Doohan, there's a rumor that McWilliams actually got a chance to ride his NSR 500 at one point, and immediately started lapping within half a second of Doohan's times. Although, take that with a grain of salt, because I couldn't really find a true source on that, it's just word on the street type thing. But perhaps if he'd been given a shot with better bikes, we could be talking about him in a completely different light, and maybe he never would have ended up on a list like this. By far, McWilliams' best success came in the 250 class. From 1997 to 2001, he rode for both Honda and Aprilia, and he managed to secure his only race win of his career at the Dutch TT in 2001, finishing ahead of future household names such as Sylvain Guintoli, Marco Melandri, and Randy DePunier. He would move back to the Premier class for the advent of MotoGP in 2002. He would test the Proton KR bike made by Kenny Roberts' team. Here's where things get a little bit weird. In 2005, he had a contract to continue riding with Proton KR. However, Dorna themselves came in and voided his contract, insisting it be given to Shane Byrne instead. McWilliams was dejected, and he had no ride for the season. However, halfway through, KTM, who was supplying the Proton KR engines that year, decided to shut off their supply to the team, leaving Team Roberts with no bikes and no rider. But since they were a legitimate factory team, they had a contractual obligation to show up and enter a rider at every race, meaning they had to find someone to ride for them in the Czech Republic fast. They called McWilliams and asked if he was okay to ride a year-old bike less than 24 hours later in Brno. McWilliams would oblige and hurry to Brno for race day. However, unfortunately, just 7 laps into the race, he would have a problem with his engine sensor and would be forced to retire. McWilliams would never return to MotoGP full-time again. However, he would race other events, including the Northwest 200, and of course, who could forget, a minor role in a Scarlett Johansson movie. Perhaps the greatest moment of his career. In 2014, at age 50, which is the age limit for riding in an FIM-sanctioned road racing event, he would return for one final race, riding a tailor-made Moto2 machine, and finishing 29th. After that race, McWilliams crossed the FIM's age limit, and was no longer eligible to compete in World Championship road racing. Instead, he went across the pond, and now he's in America, racing in Moto America's King of the Baggers series. McWilliams had an incredibly eventful career, testing bikes that were never going to be competitive, such as the Proton KR and the early Aprilias. However, he still spent 20 years competing at the highest level, and he's still racing to this day, 10 years after crossing the FIM's age limit. That's pretty incredible. He is absolutely a rider who deserves to be commended and remembered. There's a decent chance that you knew both of those riders. However, here's someone who I'd be willing to bet you don't know much about. Perhaps the most obscure rider I'm going to discuss today is Gyula Marsovsky. Marsovsky was born in Hungary, but fled the country after the 1956 revolution and moved to Switzerland, eventually obtaining a Swiss racing license and racing as a Swiss national. After fleeing his home country and landing in Geneva with his wife, he spent a couple of years working to save up and eventually purchased a 500cc Norton machine from Florian Kamathias, winner of the 1958 Dutch TT. He would spend the winter in the kitchen of his small home, taking the bike apart piece by piece until it was finally ready for testing in the spring of '59. When he was finally ready to test it, police were called due to a noise complaint and confiscated the bike. It took him some time to convince anyone to give him a shot. No one thought that he was worth giving a racing license to, but eventually, with support from Norton, he was able to obtain a racing license and begin his Grand Prix career in 1961. Soon enough, any doubts about whether or not he was talented would be completely gone. He traveled the circuit throughout the 60s and proved that he could be competitive even without the best machinery underneath him. In 1968, he finished third in the championship, and in 1969, he gave Italian manufacturer Linto their best result ever, becoming vice world champion under Giacomo Agostini. Marsovsky's racing career was a relatively long one, racing from 1961 to 1975, and starting 58 Grands Prix in the 250, 350, and 500cc classes. Marsovsky's only career win came at the 1971 250cc Grand Prix of Nations at Monza. Marsovsky may not have had the most glorious career, but throughout the 60s and 70s, he was frequently billed as one of the most talented riders, and his career is not one that deserves to be lost to time. Think of a rider who you love, who's able to compete with the best of the best at times, maybe only has 1 or 2 race wins. They might succumb to a similar fate as Marsovsky, and it's crazy to think that someone who may have once been a Grand Prix household name is now almost completely lost to time. Alright, now I'm willing to bet some of you are probably pretty upset with me right now, and some of you are saying, who? How on earth can a 9-time world champion possibly be forgotten? Well, look no further than Carlo Ubbiali. Tied for the 3rd most Grand Prix World Championships of all time, and often lauded as the greatest Italian motorcycle racer prior to the arrival of Agostini, Carlo Ubbiali is certainly not someone who should ever have been forgotten by fans. But nowadays, when I look at the lists of the greatest riders of all time, I never see his name mentioned, or even brought up in casual conversation. So why is that? Well, the answer lies in where and when he won, and someone else who did it just a little bit better. Ubbiali was there right at the beginning, starting his career in the very first year of the World Championship, 1949. The key difference between a guy like Ubbiali and other early legends of the sport is that Ubbiali spent his entire career in the lightweight classes, and never really branched out from his expertise riding 125 and 250cc bikes. Now, if you're a new fan, the lighter classes today are just billed as feeder series into MotoGP. You go Moto 3, and then Moto 2, and then MotoGP. However, in past eras, this wasn't the case. Many riders would ride in multiple classes. The classes definitely weren't seen as equal to each other, but there were lightweight and middleweight specialists who were some of the best riders on the planet. That's just what they liked to do. And there wasn't necessarily as much of an incentive to move up through the classes. So make no mistake, Carlo Ubbiali was just as skilled as some of the other greatest riders of all time. But perhaps the shift in attitude towards smaller classes over time is one reason why Ubbiali isn't remembered as fondly as other legends. That, and of course the fact that he managed to be outdone in his own specialty. In later years, Angel Nieto would prove to be an even more successful lightweight specialist, winning 13 world championships over the course of his career in the 50 and 125cc classes. So usually, when a lightweight rider from days gone by is given the nod by modern fans, it goes to Nieto rather than Ubbiali. Another thing about Ubbiali is that he was otherworldly levels of consistent. Across 71 races, he finished 68 on the podium. Think about that. He finished 95% of his Grand Prix races on the podium. If you lined up next to him, it was a guarantee. Like, he was going to be on the podium. He was probably going to be first. This is the highest figure for anyone with at least 15 career starts. He won over half the races he started in his 11-year career. And he would surely have continued to dominate, and maybe could have even surpassed Nieto's title count. However, he retired in the middle of his prime, at the age of 30, after MV Agusta withdrew their support from the lightweight classes. Ubbiali wasn't completely done with Grand Prix racing though. He continued to have a paddock presence even after his racing retirement. He was a key figure in helping get Giacomo Agostini signed with his former team, which ended up being the most successful partnership in MotoGP history. And as late as the 1990s, he worked as a spotter for Lucio Cecchinello. And as late as the 1990s, he worked as a spotter for Lucio Cecchinello's LCR Honda team, providing wisdom from a bygone era to new riders in the sport. In 2001, he was inducted into the MotoGP Hall of Fame, and by the time of his death in 2020, he was the last living rider to compete in the 1949 season. I have to wonder what he thought towards the end of his life when he watched modern races. He would have seen the start of the high downforce aero era. Man, comparing those bikes to the stuff that he was riding in 49 must have been a trip. Ubbiali's legacy is one that just confounds me. I truly do believe that he deserves significantly more praise than he gets from modern fans, and it's hard to believe that someone with as many world championships as he has, and such a paddock presence, has seemingly been completely forgotten to time. Let's talk about another underrated Hall of Famer. This one maybe even more so than Ubbiali, because while Ubbiali rarely gets a nod, I almost never see anyone mention Jim Redman. Redman was a Rhodesian racer, who got his start by helping out Formula 1 driver John Love with his switch from motorcycles to cars. As thanks for some garage work, Love allowed Redman to use his old Triumph Grand Prix machine in the Rhodesian National Championships. Redman found good success in the 1950s in his national competitions, eventually becoming the Rhodesian 350cc champion. In 1959, Redman would head to Europe a couple times on the Grand Prix calendar, hoping to secure a contract with Walter Codden's East German factory MZ, who were utterly dominating with their brand new two-stroke technology. However, he unexpectedly found a contract with Honda after their rider Tom Phillips was injured. In 1960, his full-time factory-supported Grand Prix racing career began. And he was pretty damn good. He would attend every race in 1961 in the 125 and 250cc classes. That was a big deal back then. Not many riders could afford to make the trip to every single round. However, Redman would more than prove to Honda that the cost of shipping him around the world was well worth it. He would secure 2 victories on the season and 3rd place in the 250cc championship. Following year would start the mark of a legendary period of middleweight dominance. While most riders find success in the premier class or in the lightweight classes, Jim Redman is one of the only successful middleweight specialists in MotoGP history. Redman would secure 4 consecutive 350cc world championships from 1962 to 1965, and he would double up in 62 and 63, winning the 350cc title as well. Winning the 250cc title as well. I can read. His 45 Grand Prix wins place him in the top 10 of all time, and it is criminal how few people know that he's one of the greats. I suppose that even in the eyes of the modern fans, being a lightweight specialist has its glory. It's sort of this bygone era of the guys who rode the little bikes, and that's kind of cool. But the middleweight specialist really gets no glory whatsoever. Jim Redman is maybe one of the only middleweight specialists in history, and he kind of just gets lost in between the premier class juggernauts and the little bike legends. Regardless, Redman's dominant streak in the 350 and 250 classes in the early 60s is comparable to the likes of Mick Dewitt in the 90s or Jeff Duke, and he definitely deserves more praise in my opinion. Bo Granath. I'd wager that not many of you have heard of him. I certainly hadn't before I started this channel, but as I did more and more research for my Banning World Champions video, my Nations Grand Prix video, his name just kept popping up season after season. It seemed like he was there all the time. And he was. The Swedish rider had one of the most prolific careers in Grand Prix racing history. He started 237 Grands Prix, which places him just barely outside the top 10 for total career starts. Look at the top 10 list. It's basically all riders from the 2000s, where seasons were 18 to 20 races long. Bo Granath was not from the 2000s. He raced from 1961 to 1979, and throughout that long career, all he had to show for it? 2 race wins. Granath would start his career on Norton machinery, and these bikes required a good mechanic, something that Granath really wasn't. He had to learn everything from scratch, and would often have mechanical issues that he would have to spend days or weeks just figuring out how to fix all on his own. His first couple years were rough, very bad results, and constant mechanical breakdowns. However, soon he would start to see promising results. He would start to finish most of his races, and in 1963 would compete in his first Isle of Man TT. Unfortunately for him, his very first practice lap ended up being a lot more memorable than he probably would have liked. At 120 miles an hour, one of his gas pipes would come loose, and it would start to spray fuel all over him, his open transmission, and his radiator. The fuel ignited. He was forced to slide off the bike and slide along on his feet, holding the handlebars to try and slow down. Eventually, he would let the bike go once he was at a safer speed, and focus on the flames on his own clothes. All this while the bike erupted into flames, burning down some foliage and requiring 2 full fire extinguishers to put out. His next few seasons would see a step back in results. After that crash and another incident, he was pretty psyched out, and it left him less than mentally at 100% and unable to achieve the results he wanted. However, soon he was back at his full game, and in 1969 he received his first factory contract for Swedish manufacturer Husqvarna. 2 years later, he became the very first rider to ever score points for the factory. 1972 was the best year of his career, earning 2 podiums, one in Austria and one in his home round at Sweden on the Husqvarna. This netted him 5th place in the World Championship. He would never again get a podium and would retire at the end of the 1979 season. Now, don't think for a second that Granath's lack of Grand Prix success means that he was an unskilled rider. He was a 12-time Swedish champion, 3-time Nordic champion, and his career spanned generations. He started his career facing off against Mike Halewood and Phil Reed, and ended it competing against the likes of Kenny Roberts Sr. and Barry Sheene. That's multiple generations of great riders that all competed against Bo Granath. His long career certainly deserves to be remembered. Please tell me this phone is charged. God damn it. Oh, god damn it. Today, we're ending our journey of forgotten and underrated riders by taking a look at Johnny Cecotto. Cecotto was the child of Italian immigrants to Venezuela, who followed in his father's footsteps to become a motorcycle racer. He began racing at a young age and would quickly rise through the national ranks. He was a national champion by the age of 17, and he would go on to defend his title and win the South America Road Racing Championship in the same year. He hit the international scene in 1975 with a bang, pulling off one of the most impressive Daytona 200 performances of all time. At the time, the Daytona 200 was one of the most prestigious races in motorcycle road racing. I wish I was alive for this man. Like the Daytona 200 is one of the only long endurance actual races, because the Isle of Man is uber cool for what it is, but it's not an actual race where the race is determined by position on the track. I so wish I was alive to see the best riders in the world do a 200-mile endurance race against each other. Oh man, that would be just peak. Could you imagine the Daytona 200 and Bagnaia and Marquez and Martin show up, and it would be like crack. Bring back long races, dude. Anyway, my sad American ranting aside, Cecotto's ride at Daytona was nothing short of incredible. It all started when he was pulled off the starting grid. Race officials noticed some liquid pooling underneath his bike and, suspecting a safety hazard, immediately demanded that he get off of the grid. It was soon discovered that the liquid was just water overflowing from a radiator and posed no real safety threat whatsoever. So, Cecotto was allowed to race, leaving from the pits. He was almost a full lap behind his competitors, and he had little hope of doing anything. A little is enough sometimes, though, and he would begin an insane charge through the field. He would pass half of the riders in the field on his first lap out, and reach 10th place by just lap 10. He would continue the march, and on lap 50, he passed Giacomo Agostini to take 3rd place. However, his Yamaha TZ750 finally gave out, and he had to slow down his pace and cruise home to a podium finish. Regardless, this was a shout to the rest of the world. Cecotto was here, and they had better get ready, because he was going to be a force to be reckoned with. Even with the warning, nobody was ready for him. In his rookie season, he secured the 350cc World Championship ahead of Agostini. This made him the youngest world champion ever at the time, and while he would never reach these heights again, his short Grand Prix career left little to be desired. Cecotto started 48 races, and won 14 of them, securing podiums in 28. His best aspect, however, was his qualifying prowess. He secured 13 pole positions throughout his career. 13 out of 48 is 27%, giving him by far the highest pole position percentage of any rider with over 15 career starts. And he single-handedly put Venezuela as the country with the 8th most pole positions in Grand Prix racing history. Cecotto would continue to put on strong performances throughout the 70s. He would consistently finish top 10 in the championship, and injuries in 1977 are probably the only thing that stopped him from winning another one. Closest he would ever get would be a dominant victory over American Kenny Roberts in the 1978 Formula 750 series, which was now an official world championship, and the FIM had even considered adding it as an official class. However, they had decided against it. Cecotto would end his career after just 5 years, to go and race cars instead. Eventually, he would make it to Formula 1. His 2 sons, Johnny Cecotto Jr. and Jonathan Cecotto, real original names there, are both currently automobile racers, with Cecotto Jr. having raced in Formula 2 in 2017. Cecotto, along with every other rider in this video today, played an important role in the development of Grand Prix motorcycle racing. They were all great riders in their day who, for one reason or another, just slipped through the cracks of the history books, and aren't remembered as much as I believe they should be. There's limitless potential for this. I could have included 100 different riders who were all forgotten. If you'd be interested in me making a continuation to this video and turning it into a series, I'd be very interested. But for today, that's all we've got. Let me know what you thought down in the comments below. Leave a like if you liked, subscribe if you want more. Thank you so much for watching, and always remember to have a fantastic day. And drink your Snapple. Not sponsored. Snapple, oh my god, Snapple hit me up. Snapple, I'll do it for free, just send me drinks. Oh my god, I love Snapple. That peach Snapple. The peach Snapple in the glass bottle was the best. I don't know why they stopped making it in the glass bottle. I can only find it in like the plastic bottle now. I would do despicable things for one more bottle of peach Snapple in the glass bottle. Alrighty, thanks for watching, and now we're going to pick the winner of the giveaway. I'm going to use a random number generator for this, and then I have all the responses in a Google Sheet, so we'll pick from there. Alright, congratulations to Sizu, if that's how you pronounce it, I'm not sure. I will get in touch with you by email, and I'll figure out how to ship those cards to you. Thank you so much for watching, thank you so much to everyone who entered, and yeah, check this video out, and have a fantastic day.